Hello, and welcome to this presentation on model-informed drug development, impact, and decision-making. This is part of a series and will specifically cover the topic of regulatory decision-making, covering industry and regulatory perspectives. My name is Colin Pillay. I'm a clinical pharmacologist and a pharmacometrician. In preparing this presentation, the colleagues listed on this slide provided advice, slides from talks that they had given on this topic, and shared case examples. As you can see, they hail from the industry, and some of them, like Julie and Peng, have also spent time within the regulatory agencies and thus shared their regulatory experiences. My disclaimer, however, is that ultimately the views expressed here are my interpretation of their advice and inputs, and I take responsibility for this talk. Here is what I plan to cover in this talk. What are the key and in looking at those key distinctions, are there differences between an industry versus a regulatory setting? Or are there differences between the approach regulatory scientists or decision makers would take versus an industry scientist or decision maker? I will cover the topic of why perspectives matter, because it does, and I think this is important. And throughout, I will touch on how models inform decisions. Let me start with a few examples of situations where modeling and simulation are used to support decision making. This is not an exhaustive list, but will be useful for me to set the context. As you listen to this, I'd like you to consider which of these would be relevant for someone working in a regulatory agency versus an industry decision maker. Models are used to describe complex biological systems that have nonlinearity. For example, where an increase in dose does not result in a proportional increase in drug effect. Or time dependencies, where the response at the start of treatment is not the same after continued treatment. The effect that is measured might have decreased, for example, due to tolerance development. Models are used to integrate information across time, like in the case above, for example, from the first dose and the reduced effect with time, across dose levels. Traditional statistics evaluates each dose level against no dose or placebo. Across studies, using methods to pool the data and appropriately account for statistical technologies like mixed effects modeling for differences in study designs and using appropriate relevant study covariates. Across other drugs, this can either be within or across different drug classes. In the industry, models are often used as a knowledge repository as one progresses from drug discovery through to the clinical phases of development. For example, from entry into human through to phase 3, phase 4, or post-marketing. Models are used to explain, simulate, and extrapolate. So having used a model to describe the system, to integrate information, and as a knowledge repository, can we use this now to explain, simulate, and extrapolate to new scenarios, to predict scenarios which have not been studied already? Models can be used to help fill gaps in the data, to provide answers to study questions that were not pre-specified within the specific clinical trial that generated the data. Simulation can also be used to optimize the design of future clinical studies. So let us try to tease out if there are indeed unique industry versus regulatory contexts. The top left-hand box is a catch-all set of drug development goals related to safety, efficacy, and quality, such as dose and dose regimen decisions. The bottom right-hand box makes an explicit statement that represents the global health concern, namely the apparent conundrum or conflict of revenue and profit generation in the setting of patient care or health care. All stakeholders, whether they are shareholders in a publicly listed company or members of society, would be keen to fulfill unmet medical need. The left and right poles in orange color is an attempt to tease out some of the differing perspectives between regulatory and industry decision makers. The industry scientist would be considering quantitative inputs to go, no-go portfolio decisions, or optimizing the drug development strategy, identifying alternate regulatory filing strategies, and assessing the probability of success based on that. Ultimately, this is about getting to the optimal product label. The regulatory scientist has the same ultimate goal, an optimal product label. I've added in topics like post-marketing, whether this is phase 4 commitments as well as beyond that. This does tend to be an area that is in need of more systematic approaches. However, I do like this last one that refers to examples where regulators provide incentives to meet neglected areas such as pediatrics or special therapeutic areas such as Alzheimer's disease. In many cases, this is really impactful and based on leadership provided by regulators. Consider, for example, the Critical Path Initiative for Alzheimer's Diseases, CPAD, which is a public-private partnership aimed at creating new tools and methods that can be applied to increase the efficiency of the development process for new treatments for Alzheimer's disease. In many cases here, modeling and simulation tends to provide strong support for these types of activities. So my conclusion at the end of this exercise is that actually there are more complementary rather than competitive contexts when one looks at industry versus regulatory perspectives for decision making. Perhaps this and the next slide might help to tease out the differences, since I've now changed this to represent the milestones and specific questions requiring decisions. Taken from an industry perspective, industry milestones are connected by decisions that define a product's clinical and commercial viability and marketplace performance. Here are the milestones: choosing the lead candidate, picking a dose, developing a formulations, designing and running the studies before submitting the file for new drug application and potential approval. And here are the questions. Did we pick the right compound? Did we pick the right dose? Are there still concerns about the drug effectiveness? And all of these are not necessarily static at a particular stage of development. Taken from a regulatory perspective, regulatory milestones are aligned with establishing evidence that the drug candidate is safe and effective, that the sponsor's plan has been reviewed, the sponsor's plan to generate that evidence has been reviewed, and how all of this translates into an informative label. Here are the regulatory milestones: IND approval, discussing with the sponsor to guide the dose range and the design of the trials, review of the formulation plans, and then assessing the studies as they come through. And the key questions from a regulator's perspective are: is the compound safe enough to warrant human testing? Is the phase 1 program reasonable? Are the endpoints acceptable? Are there concerns with usage relative to the standard of care and potentially reimbursement? Some decisions are difficult because of the need to consider how other affected stakeholders will respond to the position that is taken. This is particularly relevant with industry decision making. While this slide takes more of an industry perspective, however, I have to emphasize that clinical or patient perspectives tend to dominate the dialogue regardless of whether you're in the industry or in regulatory settings. The clinical pharmacologist would be interested in the therapeutic window, biomarker strategy, and dosing guidance for specific and general populations. The formulation or technical research and development team would be interested in desired drug delivery characteristics and available options, or whether new options need to be explored. The marketing team increasingly get involved from early on, but typically become much more relevant closer to filing. They would provide inputs to medical need and, most importantly, commercial performance predictions. The clinical operations team look at clinical trial sites and the associated logistics for the ultimate target population, and whether this could be supplied in a timely manner. The chemistry and manufacturing teams would work closely with the technical research and development team to assess whether the product can be manufactured robustly and to high quality and cost effectively. All of these are interrelated. Decision making has flows and handoffs as one goes through addressing questions that would lend themselves to model-based assessment. When these questions come up, this needs to be specifically and succinctly defined. In the industry, although not mandatory, these often get written up in a modeling plan, especially to help smooth the handoffs and responsibilities and define the responsibilities. The project team will review the data available, decide on collection of new data, request data analyses, and set up working groups that might include departments or cross-functional teams with the primary responsibility for responding to the question at hand. In this slide, you see multiple interconnected arrows, primarily because this tends to be an iterative process, and oftentimes one needs to go back and redefine some things guided by the drug development timelines. So how can modeling guide the decisions that need to be made, whether these are decisions by industry or regulatory decision makers? So what you've seen so far is that the data will need to be tailored to the specific decision that needs to be made relative to the question. All modeling ultimately has to answer specific questions. The two graphics in this slide sets out a range of themes that has been highlighted multiple times during this presentation. I'd like to iterate 2 points. Data from competitors, other sponsors are included for comparison and for time and investment decisions. Often, this means delving into competitor databases or the literature using processes like model-based meta-analysis. This is a special type of modeling analyses, and the whole field of model-based meta-analysis represents a powerful tool in drug development decision-making. This is whether one uses summary-level data from the literature, time course information, or individual patient-level data, all used in model-based meta-analyses. I must highlight also that regulatory agencies find themselves in a unique position to take advantage of using models as a knowledge repository as they see data from a new drug class emerge from different sponsors. Sometimes there might be a new signal, whether it's an adverse event or a efficacy signal, that appears to be emerging with a small nascent signal from one sponsor, but seems to be apparent consistently in other sponsors. The second important area is presentation of the data from a technical audience to a non-technical audience, such that the information being presented is understandable. Even though modeling is a highly technical area, the presentation does not need to be heavily technical. The point on this slide outlines why models help inform transparent decisions. Models quantitatively describe what the team knows or believes and explicitly presents the data used to construct the model together with any caveats and or limitations. It is imperative that as part of the modeling process, critical assumptions are described. The conditions with respect to associated predictions will also be described. For example, boundary conditions or the level of uncertainty or confidence in a particular prediction. And all of these helps provide the basis for discussing concerns with respect to simulation scenarios, such as simulations to other populations not studied, or extrapolation outside the range of the model data. By now, it will be clear that models integrate the data, but it's really the simulations from those models that inform decision making. So models will typically be looking backwards using available data, whereas simulations are looking forwards towards future scenarios. Models help to define the decision criteria, monitor the process, and enhance the understanding of the data. They set a benchmark for new data that is being generated. Simulations help to assess criteria, trade-offs, check the assumptions, and ultimately help examine situations likely to result in a success or a failure outcome. This slide contains a subset of the toolbox of modeling methods. This is not an exhaustive list and will complement what you've seen in other presentations in this series. I will not spend too much of time on this particular slide. In summary, modeling is at its best when the analysis informs decisions. Industry and regulatory scientists and decision makers use modeling and simulation for different but overlapping goals. The industry tends to conduct more modeling than makes its way into the submission dossiers, given that the team context and the goals are slightly different. Thank you for listening.